Welcome to the newest installment of the web series Revenue Stream with RMS. I'm Tracy Henderson, founder of Reach Communications. Here with me today is Revenue Management Solutions VP of Consulting Services, Justin Pridon, and its Director of Analytical Services, Francois Acerra. Hi guys, thanks for coming.
Hi Tracy.
Today we'll be talking about insights from RMS's latest consumer survey and how operators can use these insights to predict and prepare for what the future holds. Francois, you've been gathering this consumer behavioral data since 2020. Tell us about the process and what you've found recently and throughout the last year.
Sure. So back in March of 2020, we decided to expand a little bit our market research work outside of the work that we typically do with transactional data, and decided to ask questions directly to consumers through a series of quarterly surveys. Our first survey was fielded back in April of 2020. And since then, we've done a few, with the latest edition being fielded in February of 2021. Typically, these surveys have about 1,100 respondents in them and follow quite closely the U.S. population per census definitions.
So that's interesting. So you started those in April of 2020. In this most recent survey, what was the most surprising statistic for you and your team?
So if I think about it, what surprised me was the fact that we did a survey in November of 2020, and then we did another one in February. And we asked, whether people had a change in work environment over those 3 months. And we only found that 6% of people reported a change of working environment, meaning going from home to the office or vice versa. And well over 50% of respondents reported still working from home. So I thought this was interesting, particularly to restaurant operators, because it shows a real gradual return to, I would say, pre-pandemic routines, things like commuting and things like that. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, you work with operators ranging from entertainment venues to full service restaurants to QSR. How are they reacting or getting ready for what this work life looks like going forward?
Thank you, Tracy. And it's really great to have this data, basically because we're really rooted in the data and what we look at for each of our operators, and have this type of response survey back helps us to add context. And a lot of it starts with the transaction level data, each one of the guest stories that come to us on the check, and our operators are preparing for how this type of data is changing, how each of these occasions are shifting. And a lot of them are still in line with how Francois has seen the surveys and how we've seen the surveys come back to us. That can include the slower pace of return back to a normal pace of maybe workflow or working from home. So maybe we're continuing to see those larger shoulder periods, or maybe spread out occasions from just the normal peaks you might see at commuter meal periods like breakfast and lunch. In addition, as we do see some of that return back, even incrementally, we're also finding that the occasions are starting to broaden again. So the indulgent, the single occasions, returning and adding a little bit more business that you would see to those normal peak time frames as well. So the normal peaks of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, along with some sustained other areas that folks have always used now as we moved from the most recent months. So looking at delivery and a couple revenue channels that still maintain, even though they might have come off their peak, that's still a behavior that our operators are accounting for and making sure that they're adjusting for as maybe a regular occasion.
So that's interesting, Justin. So it sounds like some of these behaviors are here to stay. Francois, in the survey, were respondents reporting using different channels now that restrictions are easing?
So comparing the November results to the February results, we're actually seeing a lot of habits sticking, to your point. I think people that develop those habits over the past 3 or 6 months are reporting doing more of the same when it comes to dining out, taking out. The only channel we're seeing has been losing a little bit of steam is delivery. And that's mostly driven by Gen Zers using less delivery. But while those habits are sort of stagnating, optimism is increasing. Consumers are reporting higher level of optimism. They're seeing the restaurant industry recovering much sooner than they did previously. In November, about 44% of them thought the restaurant industry would recover over the next 6 months. Now that figure is 13% up. So I think overall, yeah, people are staying in those habits that they developed, but optimism is there, and I think we'll see some shifts down the road.
That's great. Well, it's always good to hear some optimism, especially after the year we've had. Justin, you're where the rubber hits the road, right? So are you seeing this optimism in client transactional data, or what are you seeing in that transactional data?
And I really do like that rubber hits the road analogy. And where we see that optimism coming in is, again, we spoke a little bit to the occasions that we see coming through that transaction level data. So the changing in activities and behaviors. So that optimism means that we're seeing some of the behaviors that we might not have seen come back. So more of the indulgent type of activity. Single occasions that might have been lost earlier because there's more consolidation of the meal experience or larger parties or larger checks. So some of these starting to fill back.
Sorry to interrupt. That might mean I'm a mom, and so April 2020, that was go to the local Mexican restaurant and buy food for the next 2 days. Now that might mean I'm actually going to go to Starbucks and get myself a cappuccino extra shot venti.
You're exactly right, Trey. And we all have the Starbucks order that at least is probably returning back to the fold as well. But again, as that activity comes in, that's what our operators are really starting to get more adjusted for and understand, again, how the business is settling out in this way. That positivity means more and more frequent type of transactions, even if it is in the peak periods we talked about earlier, even some of the shoulder periods. Additionally, in some of the activity that's here to stay, again, we talked about how some of those delivery pieces and how some of those other areas and occasions are still here to stay as well. So they're now blending in with these other pieces and other indulgent occasions or single occasions as they come back. And all of this now interacts with menus that may have been more efficient or truncated during some of the timing that we would have seen previously, just for a focus on efficiency. So how those menus are evolving, the promotional space is evolving as well as we're seeing them be more focused to these occasions and some of these other areas, so that the returning guests have something that really fits with their type of what they're looking for meals, what they're looking for, that concept of even the return of value. So as they may have more occasions, as they start to frequent more into restaurants, the return of what that everyday value means, so that each occasion is well worth the price paid, which is an area we focus on a lot of understanding how, as the guests are telling us through these surveys, how they're also reflecting into what that means for value for them.
That's great. So we have some optimism, but we also have some more value conscious, perhaps, consumers. Francois, what do you think operators should prepare for the summer season? Is it going to be busy?
Certainly busier than last summer, I would think. To go along the lines of this increase in optimism, what we noted between August and February is really the fact that people that want to dine out more post-pandemic is increasing significantly. So back in August, only 13% of respondents told us that they wanted to dine out more post-pandemic. Now it's up to 32%, right? So I think, again, as vaccinations are being rolled out, people feel more and more comfortable dining out, getting back to their old dining habits. I think these are encouraging signs for the summer for operators. Another important thing to note as well is that over 50% of respondents now believe that it is safe to dine indoors at restaurants. So again, I think these are all encouraging signs, I believe, for restaurant operators and getting ready for a busier summer season.
That's great. So Justin, how are your clients preparing both short term for the summer and long term, as best we can figure out what the world's going to look like?
our clients are approaching it with that balance and flexibility, and they really should. At the first time, we'd still, and I would focus on something Francois I think brought up even earlier, is that incremental change. We're still seeing change. We're still seeing those pieces through the data, and folks are still, our operators are making sure that they're still attuned and leaving room for change. But at the same time, with the positivity and return of transactions and opening markets, also being prepared. So there's a real rush to make sure that as the business gets busier, especially for summer and beyond, that that the models are also still well staffed for that. I think that is actually one of the areas we're seeing be a real headwind right now, is that labor supply, and making sure that as they're gearing up for that return of occasions and still keeping that flexibility for the different guests that are there, that there's enough staffing and pieces to make sure that that's allotted for.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about the labor pool, and it shrunk, it sounds like. Other than what Justin just shared, Francois, as it relates to the consumer survey, what were some of the specific concerns going forward? So there's optimism, but it wasn't 100% optimistic, right? What are those concerns?
No, there's definitely still concerns about COVID and the risk of infection. We find that the number of COVID cases at the local level is still the number one factor for deciding to dine out to restaurants. Close second, however, is the lack of safety measures adopted by others, which I think is really interesting. As people get more comfortable to go out and dine out, I think it'll be very important for operators to maintain a really safe and comfortable environment, right? Because people might feel comfortable to go out, but maybe I'm not as comfortable sitting so close to someone who I don't know. So I think there is an important point here. Also, what is interesting is back in May of 2020, we asked general household concerns, and what jumped in this latest iteration of the survey is that household concerns are much less about the inability to travel or the economic impact of the pandemic. It's a lot more about not being able to do the things they want to do. Again, COVID is still up there with a member of the household becoming infected, but also people are more concerned, about the mental and emotional health of their household. So that shift in concern is also, I believe, quite interesting, right? Because it's much less about, the economy and the traveling and all that. And it's much more about, can I do the things I want to do? And the people close to me also get to do the things that they want to do.
Yeah, I definitely understand that emotional well-being. Justin, so Francois laid it up for operators. Hey, you need to be aware of this, right? Other patrons are a big concern. What can restaurant operators do, or what are you seeing as best practices that they're already doing to communicate these safety measures, or that they are concerned about the well-being?
Well, exactly. First off, how great is it to get back to hopefully having the opportunity to eat in a restaurant? There's nothing more, in my opinion, from my family, good for mental health than being able to go out with family and friends and enjoy something and a meal that we haven't been able before. And I think through the survey pieces, that's what the guests are telling us. And you're seeing that through positivity, and you're seeing that through these return of occasions. But with that positivity, and with folks now using that for the times that they've had, it's understanding that you will have that diversity of folks now back in the restaurants, that concern about other guests and what they have for your health and well-being becomes one of those important concerns for how operators enforce that. And so the best practices we are seeing from operators are holding that straight and narrow when it comes to the communication of standards of safety, cleanliness, and all the pieces that they have established through the previous months to still be well enforced, well visible signage, clear rules, clear demarcations, clear communication in restaurant, but not only in restaurant, but reaching out through their messaging, through the other channels that you might have for delivery, curbside, so that again, that message is not only very well established on premise, but also helps when folks are making their decisions to go out now for that well-being, and being able to communicate that through their, in addition to the other messaging they're making, whether it be through promotional pieces, websites, or other ways. So again, the main takeaway is not slouching on still making sure that's a forefront communication principle, what your practices are and why it's going to ensure health and wellness for your guests as they return.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift slightly. All this stuff costs money, right? Justin talked about a shrinking labor pool earlier. We have minimum wage pressures. There's a whole lot of signage that needs to be purchased to effectively communicate safety measures. Francois, as things pick back up, how are consumers going to respond if the menu prices go up slightly? If their favorite drink or meal is a little bit more costly?
Right, that's a great question, Tracy. And it's hard to tell. I think it'll be an individual response first, but from what we were able to measure with our survey, we can see that all the reasons you just mentioned, increased labor cost pressure with increase in minimum wages, new safety and CDC guideline compliance, right, when it comes to safety and hygiene in restaurants. All of these are really acceptable reasons from a consumer point of view to increase prices. It tends to be the older generations that are actually more okay with it. They have a little bit more forgiveness and tolerance when it comes to those, sort of drastic events. When we slice the results between, younger generations, older generations, it's really the boomers that are more understanding of, minimum wages going up. Some of it is going to be reflected in price. That makes sense, right? And I think the second interesting piece of information we're able to measure is that perceived inflation between grocery stores and restaurants. Because we often believe that you sort of make that trade-off decision between cooking at home or having someone prepare a meal for you. And even though those two inflation metrics have been pretty much on par with each other over the past 3 months, food away from home inflation versus food at home inflation, the perceived inflation from the consumer perspective is that grocery stores have increased prices much more than restaurants, right? So there might be a little bit of forgiveness and tolerance there as well that might play in operators' favors to be able to increase those prices. I think Justin's team would still need to take a close look at their transactional data before making the call. But we're seeing, like I said, a little bit of forgiveness and tolerance from a consumer perspective when it comes to, those minimum wage hikes, increased food costs and things like that. But, as well, feeling the price increases from grocery stores more than they do price increases from restaurants.
That's great. Well, and Francois, you teed up my last question for Justin. What is the transactional data saying, and how are operators going to manage pricing going forward?
Thank you, Francois, for laying that right in. But and again, this is one of the wonderful things of having the survey data, because as we'd always say, that the guest is going to give you some credit as you're moving forward with some of the headwinds. And wow, has it been a very difficult time to be an operator, and continues to be with the headwinds that we're seeing. So really, our best operators are using their data to be guest focused. They're understanding what the guest is telling them and what they will bear. So something like in a survey saying that, hey, we're more willing to give some credit for the health and safety measures that you're having to incur cost on, or the inflation between food away from home and food at home in grocery stores. Our best clients are utilizing the data, both the historical data as it's evolved and the data as it currently evolves, to understand where that tolerance is. And then they're using that to be strategic and iterative. So strategic in the way of understanding where there's flexibility to take some price on what products, what occasions, what areas, and then moving that forward to understand that pricing, when used correctly, is a good long-term strategy. So as you're still seeing evolution of the guest in the market, you're able to find where you can best leverage your pricing now and still make it a successful leverage pull in the future. And it's the combination of both of those activities, learning from both the history that you've had, the times over these last few months that it's changed and what it's evolving to, is really setting on the best clients for the best path of reading their data, reading their guest, taking the right amounts of impact and not pushing too far. Because that's the challenge we'll see with a lot of folks right now is if you push too far, we all know how hard it is to get a guest back. And if you go too far too fast, you're always going to be playing catch up. So a strategic reading from the guests and what they're saying through the survey and how that's read through the data is one of the best client pieces we're seeing.
That's interesting. So I don't necessarily want to end on pricing, but we do have a lot of optimism in the market. It sounds like guests, I know I'm one of them, are ready to go back. Is there anything from the survey or just in what you're seeing with your clients that I didn't ask?
You know, what a great thing to see some of the positivity coming through the survey and seeing that reflected as to the type of occasions we're seeing come back to the market. If there's anything, you've asked great questions and given us the ability to connect them, still remaining strategic and flexible. So understanding the flexibility is still one of the best practices that we're seeing out in the marketplace. So that way, even as the environment continues to evolve and we see what's next, we're still utilizing what the guest is telling us to be able to make our best path forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm getting the sense that the new normal is going to change weekly, monthly, quarterly as we go through 2021.
And that's one of the most things is normal has always been a dynamic piece anyway. So if anymore, normal continues to be one of the more dynamic words we can have in our language.
That's great. Francois,
oh, sorry. I was going to say, I don't know if I mentioned this, but over 70% of respondents in our latest survey believe that vaccination will speed up the recovery process of the dining segment of the restaurant industry. So again, it will be an individual decision to feel comfortable again to go back out there, but I believe there's better days ahead, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great way to end. Better days ahead. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. And thank you everyone for joining us today. You can watch this whole webinar again or get insights from industry experts at www.revenuemanage.com. Thank you.